I am delighted to be here, and I do remember flying into Brisbane and attending a GPS session, and actually my concern was not only Wi-Fi, which, as we know, it's so crucial. My concern was having enough battery on my laptop. My laptop was really low after a very long flight from London to Brisbane, and I made friends with somebody in the airport who very kindly allowed me to plug in, and the security chap not only allowed me to plug in near his chair, he gave me his chair. So I'm eternally grateful, and boy, I did have to use my resilience that day. So I am going to start sharing slides, and so delighted to be here to share with you building resilience and the impact of the 10F spring model, which I have designed. And it started many years ago, 35 years ago. And then more recently, I will tell you about this. It came to the fore about 12 years ago. So let's have a look at what we are going to cover today. And firstly, what I'd really value, and I'm delighted to see that Sharon has said the latest thinking about resilience. So do pop any questions, as Nicola said, that you are holding in the chat box. And it's really valuable for us to be able to see that. I'm then going to share a personal and true story from my own family using the 10F model. And then we'll go into the 10F model itself and look at what questions I use with myself daily, as well as with clients when I'm using the 10F model. We're going to have a breakout room and plenary, and then there'll be a wrap-up session. What are your takeaways? And delighted there'll be a networking session afterwards. So some lovely questions that have come in, thank you. And how can we test levels of resilience? Hugo, thank you. A good question. And is there an easy way to learn resilience that doesn't always include crisis? Esther, this is a valuable tool for that. It's a daily tool that can be used. And how to stay resilient in the middle of disasters. And I'm very aware that there is currently so many disasters happening in the world, and the heartache that we see in Gaza at the moment. Let's look at what is a definition of personal resilience. I'm using the Oxford English Dictionary definition, which is the capacity to spring back from difficulties and have toughness. So there's some interesting elements there. And what I find valuable is that people I know, and as Nicola says, yes, I am resilient. I grew up in South Africa. You can hear my accent, and certainly learnt some resilience in those years of growing up in the apartheid era. But I want to concentrate on the first word there, which is the capacity. And that lovely question that has come from how to build resilience not in a crisis. And this 10F model addresses that, is how can we be building that capacity to be able to develop our spring back, and then to be able to develop that toughness. So to me, these are the crucial parts of it, and that they are actually, there are small steps that we can do, and I will be showing you more as we go along. So thank you for those questions. What's next is I'm going to share the personal story of how in my own family, 12 years ago, I used the 10F model with my son. This is York University on a graduation day, and a beautiful sunny day, as you can see. I'm taking you back 3 years prior to that graduation day. And actually, as I start, I've got goosebumps going right through me. This is real, and this is a true story. I was sitting in Oxford, where I live, and 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, I got a phone call. And this is what I heard. Mum, life's not worth living. I recognized it was my son, Chris, who was at York University. And I said, Chris, where are you? I've just woken up. Life's not worth living. So I said, Chris, have you had anything to eat? No, Mum, I've just woken up. And I was struggling to wonder, what do I say? It was one of those tricky mother moments. So all I could think of was, Chris, have you had anything to drink? No, I've just woken up and life's not worth living. Pause button. The context to this was Christopher and his girlfriend of 3 years had just broken up 2 weeks prior to this. She'd gone to Cambridge University and he'd gone to York University, and the relationship had ended, and he didn't really see this coming. I decided at that moment to be a very South African mother and say, Chris, you've got 30 minutes. Go and get some food. There's lasagna in your deep freeze. Go and get something to drink and go and find Charlie. I knew that he had 28 portions of lasagna in his deep freeze. He had made them at home, and together we had put them in the deep freeze. I also knew that Charlie was the friend that we all want to have when we are in a crisis. This was the longest 30 minutes in my life, I'm sure you can imagine. I phoned back after 30 minutes and I said, Chris, how are you? Mum, I'm fine, he says. Oh, the relief was enormous, as you can imagine. I said, Chris, have you had something to eat? Yes, Mum, I've had some lasagna. And I said, are you with Charlie? He said, yes, Charlie and I are in the pub and I've got a beer. We're watching rugby. I was hugely relieved. I did say to him, and I'll explain this later, Chris, you know beer isn't the fluid that counts. Have you had some water? No, Mum, I haven't. And I'll explain now why I said beer is not the fluid we talk about. So here is the 10F spring of resilience. And I'm going to run through the first 5, which are fluid, food, 40 winks, friends and family, fitness. And these are the first 5 essential elements of good self-care. And what I often say to clients or other colleagues when I'm sharing this model for them to use is these are the must-haves. So those lovely questions that came in about how can we develop resilience, not in a crisis or not in when we're in a disaster situation, which is that these are the elements we need to work on daily, and they are the must-haves. And for example, the reason why I said go and find Charlie, I didn't even mention the 40 winks to Christopher, was he kept telling me, Mum, I've just woken up. I didn't have to address the, have you had some sleep? What I'm hearing is that at 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, all he's done is sleep. He hasn't necessarily had any water or had any food. And that's why I addressed that. Clearly, the fitness wasn't essential then. I needed him to be in contact with somebody. What we've all learned going through pandemic have we not, is how important the key elements of friends and family and fitness are. And that hour that we got to go out into have some exercise. And for those of us living on our own, as I was, it certainly was very tough, although I had plenty of Zoom and Teams calls, whether they were work-related as well as being private and family and friend connections. By the way, I had my 60th birthday party sitting on this chair, having cocktails on Zoom. So that for me was part of pandemic. Let's now have a look. What are the next 5 essential elements? These are more of the nice to have rather than the absolutely must have. The next one is a focus. And the important thing about these elements is that there is a continuum for all of them. And the continuum with focus, for example, is, yes, my focus or reason to get out of bed is to run my business and whatever, whether it's be on a GPS dialogue webinar, or whether it is meeting with clients and running leadership development programs online or face-to-face, whatever that focus, that reason to get out of bed. People may have other reasons to get out of bed. If retired, may find they're volunteering, they could be looking after grandchildren. There could be people who are disabled and not able to work, and they could be volunteering. Again, it's not a money thing that is essential for focus. It is, there are various, we could have parents who are at home caring for children. So the lovely thing about the 10F, it really is flexible and able to encompass whatever is appropriate for a particular person at that time. Then we have forgiveness and physical. So for the forgiveness, I use Nelson Mandela as my role model in the way in which he, when he came out of prison, showed forgiveness on a grand scale within South Africa and also on a personal scale. I do believe that for myself, I'm not sure I would be able to show that sort of forgiveness after 27 years of being in prison and being on Robben Island as he was. And that the other crucial thing that I've learnt about forgiveness is that if we don't forgive, that bitterness can harbor in ourselves. So again, that choice of, do we forgive others or do we forgive ourselves? And what I've found in working with clients who are more on what I call the perfectionist scale is that often they may say, actually, I need to forgive myself because I'm not easily forgiving myself. And we'll come to the questions that I ask, that we find out what's important for clients. The physical one is, again, a really important one that has a huge continuum. And an example pre-pandemic, when a friend of mine who was away, I would visit her mother in a care home, and I would take my little dog, my little Westie called Rex, and she would stroke Rex. And again, that physical contact, I would have given her a hug. But as we know in pandemic, those I wonder if this was in other countries as well. What we saw in the UK was these plastic protection things with arms that people could give each other hugs, but actually had some protection from COVID virus. And then again, the lovely thing about the continuum is if we're in an intimate relationship, this would be the sexual intimacy as well that we would have that gives us physical enjoyment. So again, the important thing here is not to be stuck on what is it and what is it from the founder and creator of this. I really encourage each of us to find what is appropriate with our clients and what does physical mean to them and what's important to them. those who know me, and if you have a look on my website, Ashley will pop the website in. There's a question: would you like to meet up for a cocktail? So I'm, as you heard, I had my 60th birthday on Zoom, having cocktails, and fun is a huge element of my life. What's interesting is that at a time 12 years ago, which was a very difficult time in my life, I wasn't easily able, I didn't have much of a capacity myself to have fun with my friends. What was fabulous, and I'm so grateful to my friends at that time, is they took me came alongside me and made some fun happen. Did I actually feel as though it was fun? Not really. I was depressed at that time. I was on antidepressants. And however, I was grateful that they did things and said, come on, Diane, I'm taking you to a spa today, or come on, Diane, we're going to do this. I did the doing. I didn't necessarily, the feeling of fun wasn't necessarily there. So again, the thing I've learned from this is that these are the things to consider doing and not wait until you feel like doing them. Over the years, I have compared this model to two other models. One is an NHS model. And what I found there was that they encourage creativity every day in order to build resilience. And sadly, I have not been able to find a single word F that ties in with creativity and forever learning. So this is a two-word F, and it is forever learning, because I really do believe this, is that we need to be forever learning wherever we are in our stage of life or our career. So these are the 10 Fs, and the principle behind it is that in order to build that capacity for resilience and have toughness, that these are the things that will fill our tank. So there was a fabulous question that came into somebody sent in before the webinar and said, I've got a client who's really stressed and burnt out. How am I going to encourage them to look at the aspects of building resilience? And the simple thing is, I am dyslexic. I use a lot of pictures in my work with clients because I find it simple and clear. And this is one of the pictures, which again, very happy to share this, and we'll come to that later, how I will share the 10F model with you. But what I would do is I would actually show them the 10F with those elements, and perhaps I would explain one or two of them. I don't necessarily go into too much detail. And I simply ask two questions. Which 10F element for you is easy? And which 10F element for you is a challenge? And a very good example I have, during pandemic, I was coaching a chief people officer in the NHS. She had a workforce of 8,000 people who, it was during the first lockdown, and there was a huge shortage in the UK. I'm not sure what was happening in other countries. There was a huge shortage of PPE. And she had many of her workforce who were extremely stressed and getting to burnout. What's interesting is she herself said that she was feeling very stressed and near burnout. I asked her these two questions, and she simply said, she went straight to, she said, there's nothing easy for me at the moment. She said, my one big challenge is I'm not eating. In our coaching session, what transpired and what she decided to do was to ask her daughter, who had come back home. This is what was happening in the UK. A lot of young adults went back home to save money, to be online. She sadly did not have a job. And what this client decided to do was to pay her daughter to cook a meal every day, have a meal ready for when she got home at 8 o'clock. And not only that, actually to pack a lunchbox for her during the day, so that when she set off to work, she could have lunch. And she set off at 6 o'clock in the morning, was only getting back at 8 o'clock at night. And she knew then she would have lunch and she would have dinner when she got back. So the other questions, which those of us who are coaches, as we're closing a session, we may find are useful, which is which one or two elements are you going to work on if people have raised more than one. And another closing down question is, what is your one first step? So that gives not only the personal story, and by the way, I'm glad to tell you that Christopher did recover. He went on to graduate and recently got married to a lovely woman that he shared a house with, and they were best friends for the first 2 years at uni. So it has ended in a lovely marriage. So what we've covered now and will be lovely to see if there are any more questions that have arisen. So curious, Kate, thank you for your question, to know the evidence base for the efficacy of these 10 factors versus other factors. Kate, a very good question. Before we go into the breakout and plenary, what I have done is the other comparison is I've worked with a psychiatrist here in Oxford and compared with his model. He has used, his model is called the OASIS model, and the factors are very, very similar. He has done some trials with some schizophrenic patients. Again, my model has not been used in that scenario. Our factors and elements in the models are very similar. His only has 6 factors, whereas, as you can hear, that mine has 10 factors. So, Kate, my answer to you is that it's used extensively. I use it daily. I was out this morning having a walk and going to an outdoor gym for my fitness, and I practice this daily. I use it extensively with clients. So there's been no actual research trial with it. What I have done is used it with a patient with severe anxiety. And I'm just going to stop sharing at this point. I will come back to the guidelines about the breakout room when we are ready for that. The example of working with a client with high anxiety. So just to give you the scenario, she, a young person, and in her early 20s, she would get regular panic attacks, and how her anxiety would show up was she would be trying to do something, and nausea would overwhelm her. She would then, and her panic attack would start. She would sometimes start vomiting, and she would have to retreat, go back home, and have what she called a duvet day. During the time that I was coaching her, she was going for an interview for a big job in London, and she knew that this would be very tricky for her to achieve. And we used the 10F, which had become part of the language that we were using during the coaching. And the conclusion that she came to was to put 2 boiled eggs in her handbag. And this was more a preventative measure rather than waiting until the nausea struck. And so again, coming back to those must-haves, that the first 3, the fluid, the food, the 40 winks, are those, we must have those every day. If we are not having those, we all know we might have a grumpy day. I use grumpiness as a measure. And so what this client did was to make herself start eating a tiny bit of that boiled egg before the nausea overwhelmed her. She had an interesting learning. Yes, she was a bit nauseous. Yes, she struggled However, she got to the interview, and on reflection, she said afterwards, it was a big learning for her about her anxiety. And she said, I learnt that my anxiety would not go away. And she's more of a perfectionist, and she was trying to get rid of her anxiety. And she said what she learned to do was to put her anxiety into a suitcase. And she said, I took my anxiety with me in the suitcase, but I chose where it came out. And it was because she was doing the fluid and the food en route to the interview. The good news is she did well in the interview, she got the job, and she was delighted, and then was able to have this learning. I'm delighted to say it's been a long, slow journey for her. She has just qualified as a solicitor, and each time her anxiety comes back and she addresses it, and we use the 10F. So that's an example of a reality of using the 10F. I'm going to share again. And so thank you. We've got the 10F has been put into the chat box. Thank you, Vadrana, for sharing it. What we're going to do now is we are moving on to the breakout, and we will be having a plenary session afterwards. But let's just, while Nicola is getting ready and putting everybody into their breakout rooms. So if you haven't already and you are able to and would like to join a breakout room with 2 other people, then put yes in front of your name. Do please keep your name there. It is valuable for us to, and people in the breakout to still have it. When you get into the breakout room, it's going to be 9 minutes plus 1. Could you share your name, your role, your company, and where you are today, which country? We have some wonderful examples of different people from different countries today. And then the questions that we are going to explore in the breakout room is, for you, what is the impact of the 10F model today? So keep it personal for you in your role as a coach, consultant, or whether there, I do know there are some clients that are on here today. What for you is the impact of the 10F model? And then in your breakout room, what comment do you have, or what question would you like to bring to the plenary session? And so just a heads up, when you come back into the plenary, we will start with a minute's silence. And if you could start with writing in the chat box what the impact is and your comment or question from your group. And what I will do is I will invite people to comment. So again, the timing is it's going to be 9 minutes plus 1, as we call it in our Zoom world. And I'm going to hand over to Nicola. So do take this minute now to write down your comment or question in the chat box. We've had some fabulous ones before that we will try and address as well. Be ready to share. What I'm going to do is going to invite some of you to share. And we've had some questions about, would you like a copy of the 10F? By the way, I am very generous. My only request is that you give recognition from, and you say that you are using my 10F model. So Ashley is now going to pop our email address in the chat box. If you'd like just the 10F model, then send an email with just 10F. If you would like to sign up for our regular newsletter, which is only every other month, then simply pop in the email that you would like 10F and newsletter. So I do trust, I'm going to stop sharing now as we come back to the plenary session. And so thank you for those who have put messages in the chat box. I'm going to address some, firstly, before I invite some of you, there were some very good questions that were put in earlier. One of them was from Anne. Anne, thanks for your question, to say, at what point do I separate mental health issues from coaching and advising somebody to go to therapy? A really, really important question, because as you can hear, I use this extensively with clients. I've used this in leadership development workshops with clients as well, and particularly did this not only on a one-to-one basis, but with some NHS trusts. And I am very clear, my role, I am an executive coach. And when I get warning signals about people being low, I do ask, have you been to see your GP? And perhaps a question, would you consider going to see your GP? And again, we know that boundary we hold between being executive coaches and counselors is really, really important. So I am not a counselor. I am an executive coach. I coach the whole person. So I'm very clear about that, is that I encourage people to bring who they are as the whole person to the coaching session. So for example, it might be, I had a client messaging me saying, sorry, I can't attend your webinar, my child is ill. And I said, join the webinar with pleasure, have your camera off and you can just listen. So just knowing that how we can be flexible, we are realistic about who we are. There was two other good questions. How can we support people from Charlotte? Charlotte, thank you. Can you give us a wave? How can we support people to recover from burnout and restore their resilience? The 10F model is a valuable how to build that capacity and restore resilience, and really the must-haves of those first 5 elements. Anna gave a very good question about how can we maintain resilience in a fast-paced environment. I can assure you, I'm a believer, not only the creator of, I believe in this 10F model, that no matter how fast-paced our environment is, all of us need fluid, food, 40 winks, friends and family and fitness. And by the way, I measure my fluid as I pour a jug of fluid each morning. Sometimes it has ginger in and cucumber. Today, no. So that I've got a measure of how much fluid have I had in a day. I aim to go through 2 jugs. In winter, I'm not as good at doing that. So I would like to invite some people to a lovely question. So could we have Martin O'Malley? I don't want to make assumptions about where you're from, Martin. So could we have Martin with your question? And then could we have... So we've got a good question from Lisa Olden. So let's first have... could we have Martin first and then Lisa? Could you please give your question in 1 sentence, just so that we could hear from as many people as possible? So Martin first, and then could we have Lisa Olden? Martin, as you come off mute.
Okay. Actually, in our discussion, we had 2 questions, which I put in chat. I think the one which is more pertinent is if forgiveness comes up from the client as something they want to work on, how would you encourage them, or how would you work with them on solving or getting over this forgiveness issue? It's probably one of the most more difficult of the 10 to work with, I guess.
And Martin, what's fascinating is people might say, you know, for me, the having fun is really difficult. So it really is specific to clients. The forgiveness is a very interesting one. And Lisa, I do know you're bringing in the faith element. So to me, the forgiveness isn't, this is not, we don't have to have a faith in order to, that it's important to forgive. And Martin, what I would do is really use the good, solid coaching questions that we use, which is, for example, I would use, what would forgiveness look like for you? Who do you need to forgive? What are your, when you get into the, so really, I even though I am a very high energy, fast paced, and can be directive, I absolutely find that balance, as we know is essential in coaching, to stay with the agenda of the client. So I would also check boundaries of, are they comfortable to explore the issue of forgiveness, knowing that for some people it might be tricky, and I would perhaps then pause and say, what do we need to put into place for this to feel safe for you to explore forgiveness? So I'm using all of my executive coaching skills and nous, and I call it the use of self as an OD consultant, which I also am an organization development consultant. So Martin, valuable question, and thank you for that. So could we have Lisa Alden? Lisa, could you give us the question in one sentence? Thanks for coming off mute.
Thanks, Diane. I'm staying off video because my network is appalling, so apologies for that. Hopefully you can hear me.
We can.
Our group talked about spirituality and whether that could fit under, replace, be there instead of, or be added to friends and family.
So Lisa, again, can you hear how, the great question. And so two things about this. As you can hear, the elements have that flexibility to be able to be what I call be in service of the client. And if I know that my client has a faith, when I use the phrase, I seek permission from a client to bring the whole person into the room, that may have been something that has come up already in the coaching, and I would test out how they want to use that. I felt it was really important that this model was able to be used in any cultures, any faiths, anybody that did not have a faith either, and that it was really important that it wasn't exclusive and was rather inclusive. I myself work in many different cultures. You can hear I've come from the South African culture, and part of my one of my values is to be able to include people, whoever, wherever, and whatever faith or non-agnostic, atheist, whatever they are. So it was so a really important one, and was important in the design of the model, which, as you can hear, it developed slowly. So by the way, the starting 35 years ago, I started learning it when I was breastfeeding my daughter, who was 35. Now she's 35 years old, and she's been breastfeeding her babies. And the things I learned were essential for making milk is enough fluid, enough food, and 40 winks. Only those three. I didn't need the others. I had my mother over here from South Africa. So again, what I would encourage, and a great question, is to be able to take the model and be fully in service of your client at that time. Let us hear any other questions. Let's have perhaps two more that we could. So Fiona, thank you for that alerting that it is 40 winks is not understood. It's an English term that we use for sleep, and really, really important that we have sleep. So Claire, would you like to bring your question? Claire Barnett, I'm going to ask you to come in, and then Esther Zerbel, could you come in with your question? So firstly, let's have Claire Barnett, and then let's have Esther Zerbel. And could you put your question or comment in one sentence, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. I'm doing some research into how coaching can enable children to build resilience, and I'm just wondering if you've got any experience with coaching with children at all, please.
So Claire, good question. And what's your definition of children? Up to what age are you defining it as you come off mute?
So technically we're looking at up to 16 years old.
Okay, so in my portfolio of coaching, I do coach young adults, and this is 17 to 22. Some of this is pro bono coaching that I do because I am passionate about helping young people at that stage of their careers to find their focus, find their feet. So Claire, my experience is more between 16 and 22 years of age. And all I could say to you is that absolutely the 10F model works. Claire, from my experience, what I've noticed in this younger generation is, so this is my Diane Wilkinson opinion, is that anxiety is a much higher element, and people needing to simply stay in their room all day on their laptop. By the way, this includes my children when they came home and they would spend a day on the laptop in their bedrooms, to my horror. I do believe that this day and age that we are living in, the social media age, the obsession with having to live up to the standards of, that those questions, so the crucial one I find with the anxiety is the friends and family. And actually, Claire, one of my other children, not the Christopher one, at the age of 11 had a serious wobble, didn't cope well with going to school, and we called it that he needed to jump in. So can you hear how the 10F model has evolved over the years? I've got goosebumps as I'm telling you this. And his task every day was he needed to go and find a friend and jump in. I also coached another young lad who, before he got to 16, and both of them, we called it jumping in. And it essentially was addressing that friends and family part, that we need connection with people. And we know that belonging and connection is absolutely vital. So would love to chat to you. By all means, contact me by email. My email address has been put into the chat box. So who else was going to come in? Claire, thank you for your question. Let's hear from...
Yeah, I have more of a comment, which is, you have some really wonderful prerequisites for resilience. That's essential before you can actually overcome challenges and build resilience. So I'm distinguishing between what's needed and between what actually causes it in the end.
Yes.
And I would love to see the extension of the spiral going up farther.
Ah, Esther, I love it. By the way, my clients, colleagues, and friends, there are another 20 Fs that are on my phone, and people say, Diane, we need this one in. So there are others that we could, but I agree with you. The essence of this is to be building the capacity to have resilience. So as we bring the session to a close, I am going to share our last slide, and just to ask people to pop in the chat box, what is your takeaway from today? If you would like to link in with me, by all means, we will pop the QR code in the chat box as well. Do connect with me. If you choose to just follow, by all means, you can do that. Could you pop in the chat box what your takeaway is from today? 3 questions. What's your takeaway? Put it in 2 or 3 words. and what has worked well. Nicola would love to have some feedback. So we often ask, and Ashley's going to put these questions in the chat box, what has worked well in this webinar today? And an EBI, what could have been even better if? Do pop that in the chat box as we bring the webinar to a close, and I will hand over to Nicola as I'm just going to read one or two of the takeaways, and then I will hand back to Nicola. So to codify the essentials concisely, Claire Tomlinson, Orlando, the easily accessible and digestible model, and by all means add to your coaching toolbox. And wonderful that somebody's asking Gavin to ask for a longer breakout room session. When people ask for that, we know that, Nicola, you're getting it right. And very focused, easy to digest. Lovely, thank you. And from Esther, fascinating. What worked well, leading the questions for the breakout room, and more of a spiral. Thank you for that feedback. So do keep putting your comments as we bring this to a close, and I hand over to Nicola. Nicola, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Diane, and thank you everybody for just jumping and engaging with this session. It's been brilliant, and I've been looking at the comments as well, and the simplicity of the model is something which is really appreciated, I think, and it really makes you think. And Diane, I mean, I've got a question for you as well. You know, what are you yourself taking from this session and from the input that everybody has given so far?
Nicola, what I found fascinating was just that reminder of what is our role as executive coaches, and what is the boundary between executive coaching and therapy, which a brilliant question that came up, and absolutely I am faced with some clients, and I do believe it is our responsibility. I believe very strongly it is my responsibility as an executive coach to manage that boundary with openness and transparency, and with courage as well, and not to, as we say in English, pussyfoot around. To me, so that was a wonderful takeaway. I also love the reminder, which comes back to the definition of resilience, the reminder of we need to build the capability with the 5 essential elements in order to build resilience. So when people have got to that burnout stage, what can one do? Absolutely break it down to the basics of, let's have a look at the first 3. What's your sleep been like? That's a huge one, I find, when people are at burnout. And I often use Stephen Covey's what can you and can't you control? But the reminder of what is our role as executive coaches, what is the boundary with therapists, and also knowing that we need to take it in stages. We need to build that capacity in order to build resilience, to be able to have the mental toughness to face tricky situations. Nicola, I love your questions that you ask me.
Thank you, Diane. And I've got a comment here from Jean-Marc in the chat here, which for me just resonates. It says, thank you for reminding us the strong connection between body and mind. And yes, the strong connection with body and mind, I think, was very evident in your model. And Diane, thank you so much for leading this dialogue. The reflection and the learning we can all take with us too. So you can download the chat. You should be able to download the chat anyway. Click the 3 dots at the bottom of your screen underneath the chat box, and then click Save Chat. And I would encourage you to do that because it is a minefield, and that sounds a negative word, isn't it? It's a gold mine of different reflections in there as well. So as you yourself reflect on this session and think about what I'm taking away, you can then read what other people have occurred to them as they've been going through the session as well. So thank you very much. Ashley has also been taking a great note of the people who've marked in the chat if they want to have the resilience model and newsletter sent to them as well. But do email Diane directly, and that is in the chat. I'd say that rather than leaving your email addresses in there, because I'm always twitchy. I'm just always twitchy about GDPR. It's just a little twitchiness that I have. So to email Diane directly, but Ashley's got notes of that too. And we have another half an hour, actually about 25 minutes now, of networking afterwards as well. So if you can stay and you'd like to stay, it'd be lovely to have you. If you have to go, obviously understand. But if you would like to stay, then I'm going to open up some breakout rooms for you to choose which ones you might like to go into.